For our lesson this morning, we're going to read, so if you want to follow along, Matthew 7, chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. We were talking earlier during Bible class that a lot of times ministers would preach on Mother's Day, a Mother's Day sermon. I have done that off and on through the years. This Sunday, I didn't choose to preach a Mother's Day sermon. I recall that several years ago, while my mother was still living, she would say, "I always hate to go to church on Sunday morning for Mother's Day." I go, "Why is that?" And she would say, "Well, because every time the preacher preaches on mothers, I don't feel like I live up to the sermon." So we won't have one this morning, but that's not to say that all of you who are mothers and grandmothers go home and read Psalm or Proverbs 31. Because a lot of times, a lot of those sermons came right out of Proverbs 31. Matthew 7, 1 through 5. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Man, what a passage. As we are going through the book of Matthew and thinking about God being with us, we come to a section on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaching on judging. This is a tough lesson. One thing I've been struck by this time going through the Sermon on the Mount, it seems like every single subject that Jesus addresses has to do with daily living. And it gets right down to the core of what Jesus is looking for. And he steps on toes as he does it. This one is amazing. We're going to look at some things that perhaps will challenge every one of us this morning as we approach this. Would you agree with this statement? We hate to be judged by people. You ever been in a situation where you're clear, somebody judged you, and you're like, they don't know me. They don't know the whole situation. Why are they saying they don't have the right to say that? And we found ourselves in that situation, haven't we? Have you ever been misjudged, or have you ever misjudged another person only to your own embarrassment? Have you ever had that happen? Realize that, I didn't know the whole story, and I said something before I should have said something. And we get ourselves into trouble. So remember that Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, he's going to address some of the most important things about kingdom living and what it means to be a disciple. This is going to be one of those, remember last week, don't worry. I had a lot of responses to that sermon. This one, don't judge. Jesus is going to make it clear. This is part of being a disciple. If you want to follow me, this is what your life needs to look like. And it makes me wonder, I was thinking about this, see if you can get your head around this too. I'm wondering if even this early in Jesus' ministry, he was experiencing himself, people judging him because of his early messages, and they didn't really know that much about him. I suspect he was already getting some of that. Judging and discernment are not the same thing. I can hold someone accountable without judging them. And I've noticed through the years, people confuse those two. Because I'm holding you accountable, it doesn't mean that I am judging your motives. And we'll talk about what that means. And oftentimes when someone says, stop judging me, it's because they don't like what you say. And just because a person doesn't like what you say, doesn't mean they're judging you. And sometimes we slip into that mode kind of as a defensive mode, okay? So let's begin with the command. This is fascinating. He starts off with a command. Do not judge. It's a command. And when Jesus gives commands, I think we need to listen, especially if we claim to be a disciple. So what is this definition of judging? What is Jesus talking about? Um, we're assuming, it's when we assume the motive of someone with the intent of condemning them and passing judgment. We here's one of the places we have to start. I would say 99% of the time, I don't know why you do what you do. Now, I can guess, but if you haven't told me, I don't know. Here's a question it raised for me, and I forgot to put this in my outline, but I was thinking hard on this yesterday. Why is this such a bad thing? What's so wrong with judging people's motives? After all, the human mind doesn't like a vacuum of information, so guess what? When we don't know why people do something, we just fill in the blank, and it makes us feel comfortable. we, we don't like missing information. Well, this is critical. And we're gonna take that question and we're gonna kind of answer it as we go through the whole lesson. Why is judging so detrimental? And we've already talked about a little bit the difference between judging and discerning. That's very important. To be able to have the wisdom to discern what's going on, but you don't judge the intent of why people do it. And sometimes that's a fine line, and you have to ask God to help you with that. Why do people resort to the charge of judging when you try to hold them accountable? Well, it's because they don't like being held accountable. I'm just shocked and appalled by our culture of how little people want to be held accountable. We don't, just across the board. Nobody wants to be held accountable hardly. And as a result, when they hear something that's kind of on the edge of trying to hold someone accountable for something, they say, well, you're just judging, so I'm not going to listen. Jesus takes us a step further. This is interesting. He's going to say that there's a reciprocal action being referred to here. That when I judge other people, you're going to be judged in the same way. Ooh. So that same standard we use on others, it's going to be used on us, whatever that standard is. Now, Jesus doesn't specify when or how. That's interesting. But here's something that's almost a truism. We usually want to be treated better than we treat others. We're just that way. And it's funny, think about this. When you say or do something that you know is wrong, and somebody is going to interact with you about that, you're hoping that they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. We really hope that. Why is it that we want from others what we're not willing to give? It's part of the human condition. And if we're not careful, we can end up judging people in ways that we would never want to be judged that way ourselves. Never, not in a million years. Now, let's take a look at the speck. Jesus is going to use a hyperbole, an exaggerated illustration. It's actually, I found a cartoon, I thought this was funny. But he's using this humorous example to engage in our imagination what that would look like and the irony of it. If I got a plank sticking out of my eye, I'm in no condition to look into your eye and see what speck you've got there. And even if you were to ask me to help you with the speck, if I've got a plank in one eye, I don't think I could help you with the speck. I couldn't see it. So this illustration is really powerful. And there's so many things we could do with this, and I thought I'll just mention this. It has to do, first of all, with my own self-awareness of where I am spiritually. Let me give you an example. If you have your Bibles, jump over to the book of James, because James talks about this. And it's an important principle. I think it ties in here really well. In verse 19, my brothers, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring them back, remember this, whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. The attitude that we respond to other people, even when situations where they need to be held accountable, the way in which we do it is crucial. Even in the book of Galatians, chapter 6, verse 1. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. Have we failed on that, the gently part? We get so wrapped up in wanting to make sure a person's, what's the word? Our parents used to use this. Straighten up and fly right. You ever hear that phrase growing up? Straighten up and fly right. And there wasn't any gentleness with it at all. But watch yourselves. You also may be tempted. Because he says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way, you'll fulfill the law of Christ. Sometimes we miss the burden bearing. It's so easy to judge another person, their motives, instead of the burden bearing. But this whole idea then of his illustration with the plank coming out of your eye and looking and focusing on someone's speck. And when we focus on others, we forget to pay attention to where we are. We're not taking responsibility for ourselves. And with this illustration, another important point, I think I mentioned this, with the plank in our own eye, we can't see normally, and our vision is impaired and only half as good. If you've ever had something in your eye and had to drive with something in your eye, or do some, and you have vision impaired in one eye, it's just amazing how it changes everything, and you don't get to see stuff as they really are. And one of the things Jesus is implying here, if I run around trying to judge people's motives, I've got that plank still sticking out of my eye. I can't see myself as I am, and I don't really have a good perspective on what's really going on. Now, Jesus doesn't identify that speck of sawdust that I see in somebody else's eye. And I thought, I wonder what that would be. Have any of you been guilty of speck inspecting? When you see something in somebody else you don't like, and you think you know why they're doing it, you start pointing stuff out. Well, we've all been guilty of that. And it's interesting that here James doesn't make a list, but boy, he could have made a long list. It could have made a long chapter. So we have to think, how has this been lived out in my own life? Now, Jesus continues, and boy, he's using the hammer here. There's the charge of being a hypocrite. In this situation, a person is a hypocrite. Well, what is a hypocrite? Our English word comes from the Greek word hypokrites, which in Jesus' time would describe the person on the theater stage. It describes a person putting on a costume, having a mask, playing a role. So how does that fit then in this topic? So you've got a person, look at the cartoon. He's making out like he's happy, but what is he behind? He looks pretty miserable to me. So a hypocrite, one who says that there's something when they're not. When Jesus is pointing out that if I am going to be engaged in judging people's motives, I'm pretending to be a disciple, but that's not what a disciple is about. And that's why he uses this strong word. It's a strong word. And it's one that Jesus uses. And, oh, this is interesting. Have you ever gone on Google search, look at all of the material, both blogs, podcasts, books, that have to do with hypocrites just in the business world? You'd be amazed how much people don't like hypocrites just out in society, let alone talking about in the church. So I want to look at this amazing thing that happens in the New Testament. The word hypocrite is used 17 times, and Matthew uses it 13, Mark once, and Luke 3. For some reason, it makes us ask the question, what is there about a hypocrite that makes it so important that Matthew in his gospel talks about it in Jesus' ministry more than anybody else? 13 times it occurs. It's almost unique to Matthew. What is going on? Because a key element The focus of Jesus' teaching ministry was to attack and undermine the role of hypocrisy in religion. I've often said, if Jesus hadn't have done that and focused a lot of his teaching on that, a lot of his energy, if he had just kept his mouth shut, he wouldn't have ended up on the cross. If he'd just been quiet. Well, that's not why. Jesus didn't come to earth just to be quiet. He came to earth to challenge some things. And hypocrisy was right at the top of his teaching list. And I looked carefully at all 13 occurrences of hypocrisy in Matthew, went back over them, looked at them. How much time do we have? Can we go till 2:00? I was amazed. I'm going to give you just a real quick summary of all these 13. It's in the context of giving, praying, and fasting. People can do it for all the wrong reasons. Hypocrisy in worship. Jesus says, your lips can praise me, but your heart can be far from me. Hypocrisy. People came to Jesus and said, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? He goes, well, you hypocrite, bring me a coin and I'll show you. So they're trying to catch him. In Matthew 23, there are two references that just blows my mind. He says, you Pharisees, you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. And it's almost like we would say today, we're standing at the church door and we're making sure some people don't come in. I mean, it's a really indicting language. For you neither enter yourselves or you're not going to allow anyone else to enter the kingdom. And here's a note that I want you to know about. This is why legalism is so evil and dangerous. Remember, we talked about all of the purposes of going through and studying Matthew. It gets at the heart that we're not going to let people in the church unless they meet my criteria. That's dangerous territory. Later on in Matthew 23, he says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, you travel across sea and land to make one single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you would think Jesus said, wow, that's good. I'm glad you did that. No, listen to what he says. You make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Man, that is strong language. They're worse off when you get through with them. Matthew 23, woe you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for if you clean the outside of the cup and plate, but inside you're full of greed and self-indulgence. You're also like whitewashed tombs. Outside, the tomb is white, it looks fine, but inside it's full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. And then, let's see, one more. Talks about the wicked servant. This is a little parable he gives. The servant says, my master is delayed. He begins to beat his fellow servants and he eats and drinks with the drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he doesn't expect it. And at that hour he doesn't know. And he'll cut him in pieces and put him in with the hypocrites. In that place where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus' use of this word gets to the heart of both relational and kingdom abuse of other people. That when I put myself in a position that I'm going to judge you, I'm going to use you, I'm going to abuse you, I'm going to minimize you, all of that, then we are a hypocrite. And Jesus gives some of the worst description of the destiny of the hypocrite. So as we get toward the end of this lesson, let's look at some things that are very clear and simple. I call them simple yet powerful truths. First of all, don't do it. That's the first simple truth that we walk out here with. Don't do it. Number two, pray for God to help us with this. I am convinced when I read so many of Jesus' teachings, many of us feel like we're not there. And often Jesus will hold these up as ideal for the Christian life, and that's okay. But boy, the next thing is we just need to be on our knees praying constantly. God, help me get there, because without your help, I'm not going to get there. Next, Don't judge because it'll come back on us. And I call this the spiritual boomerang. Whatever we use to measure other people and judge them, it's going to come back on us. That may not be immediate. It may be further down the road, but Jesus is pretty clear about this. And stay out of the speck inspecting business. Unless you ask me to look into your eye to remove a speck, I'm not going to walk up to you and say there is one and try to take it out. So it's not my role to do that. Stay out of that kind of business. Being a disciple is fundamentally about the spiritual process of asking God to help me remove my own plank and log. And I don't know about you all, but I always feel like I have a ton of them sticking out. And I'm having to work on them all the time. A disciple of Christ sees people as God does. That is a challenge. Because too many times I want to filter people through my own lens and I want to see them through my own criteria, and they don't come up the way God sees them. Judging others labels me as a hypocrite. We're living in a new age now. It's the AI, the age of AI. And if you've not seen what's out there on research, all kind of conferences, all kind of congressional meetings, all kinds of companies trying to go after, see who's going to win this AI war. Even now, if you just do a simple Google search on AI, or if you just do a Google search, AI gives you the answer. Now, the problem is with AI, you don't know where the answers are coming from. So you have to be a little leery of what you're reading. So far, a lot of what I've been reading at AI is pretty good. You just don't know where all of the material is coming from. So when I got through, the reason I'm saying this, when I got through with my sermon, all studied up, all prayed up, and all readied up. Preachers go that route. I thought, I wonder what AI says about this passage. And so I put it in an AI generative tool, and this is what came up. And it's kind of good. Listen to this. According to Jesus' teaching in Matthew 7, 1 through 15, it is considered wrong to judge others because doing so often involves a hypocritical attitude and a failure to reflect on one's own faults first. Jesus emphasizes that criticizing or condemning others without self-examination can lead to unfairness and arrogance. He warns that when we judge others, we may be overlooking our own shortcomings, which makes our judgment self-righteous and hypocritical. Instead, Jesus encourages us to first examine ourselves and address our own faults before offering constructive help to others. This teaching promotes humility, self-awareness, compassion, and emphasizing that we should approach others with humility rather than judgment. I was all done, and then I found this. Now, I'm going to throw out something for y'all to be praying about. There's a huge, it's a huge issue right now with preachers. Do you know that some preachers go to AI generative tools first, punch in the passage or their question to preach on? Whole sermon right there. And it's becoming a real problem. In fact, one person said, and you may know this because they actually have created robots that look a lot like people and they can even speak. One church was saying, we're afraid that one of these years, a church is going to have in their budget the ability to purchase a robot that looks like a preacher, all dressed up and everything, programming, putting behind the pulpit, punch a button, and out comes the sermon. Who knows? We may be coming to those days. Well, so I'm in the habit, and one of the things I'm doing, I'm actually doing some research with ministers right now to see how they're handling this tool. The way I've always looked at it, since I began looking at it back in February, when I first became aware of how you could use AI, I use it kind of like I do my commentary books on my shelf. When I get done, I'll pull a resource off the shelf. I wonder that's a good point. I didn't think about that. But I think it's a real ethical issue for ministers if you use it first and it becomes your go-to and you don't study You don't pray, you don't reflect. It's not a production of what the ministers lived with during the week. I have a problem with that. So we need to be praying for our ministers. This is probably one of their number one ethical issues right now they're having to live with week in and week out. And what I'm finding is the temptation is for two reasons. Time management. You wouldn't believe how much time ministers have to spend during the week doing everything but studying. And number two, creativity. That week in and week out, ministers feel like their message becomes so bland or so same, and people just kind of tune out, listen to the same speaker week in and week out. So guess what? It motivates ministers to go to other sources wholesale. Just use the whole thing, hoping that it'll bring a little bit of creativity to their presentation. So be praying for ministers. Right now, this is a huge issue. But I was really interested in, okay, what does AI say about this passage? And really, I'm kind of impressed with it. Yeah, it's really a good summary. So this morning, let's end with this idea. When you leave here, ask God's help. Don't judge. That's not part of being a disciple. We can't judge people's motives and intents. That's not who we are.